Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to build a full stack CRUD application utilizing Django as our backend framework and React as our front-end library. So for those who don't know, CRUD basically stands for Create, Read, Update, Delete. It's the most basic form of creating a REST API. It means that I'm going to show you guys how to create a website in which you're able to navigate through the website, create some data, so add some data to a database, be able to read some data, so display some data from a database into your website, and then also alter that data and delete that data. Now, I don't expect you to have any prior knowledge of either Django or React to be watching this video. However, I do expect you to at least have some understanding of JavaScript and Python, which are the languages that we're going to be using. But also, based on personal experience of me when I learned all of these technologies years ago, I know that sometimes you can even start watching if you're not that good with those languages. So if you want to check out the code, all of the code will be in the description. I'm also going to put some timestamps in this video for facilitating it to you guys. And yeah, that's basically it. Now let's get into the tutorial. Okay everyone, so as you can see, we're going to start off with this empty project inside of VS Code. I just created a folder, called it React Django, and I just opened it up on VS Code. Right off the bat, I want to separate a project into two different folders. So I'm going to come over here and create a folder, call it the client, which is where our React part will exist, and then the server. So I'm just separating both of them for a variety of reasons. It facilitates our project, its structure, and it also facilitates for us to actually, if we're ever going to deploy them, deploy everything separately. So I actually want to start out by building the front end. Sometimes I like to start with the backend first, but I feel like for your understanding, it might be better to have some visual representation of what we're working with before we actually start building the backend. So in order to do that, I'm going to change my directory into the client. So I'm going to do cd client, and I'm going to run yarn create vite app. Perfect. Now it's going to ask us some questions. For those who don't know, Vite is just a way for us to generate our React application. If you're seeing tutorials out there using Create React App, don't use it. Use Vite. Create React App used to be the way to go, but Vite and Next.js is the way nowadays. So I'm going to choose React over here, since Vite allows you to build with different libraries. I'm going to choose JavaScript for this tutorial. And perfectly, now I can just come over here into my client, cd into my app, and then just do yarn, so I can install all the packages that come with Vite. And then you'll see that if I run yarn dev, it should actually start running my app inside of this browser over here. And yeah, this is the boilerplate code for Vite. It comes with this, but we're going to actually start deleting some of this stuff so we can build our things. By the way, I don't want to focus at all on CSS, so I'm not going to be doing any CSS in this video because it wastes time and it's not the purpose of the video. If you want to check out some CSS, definitely watch other tutorials after this one. But if you want to learn logic, that's what we're going to be working with today. So I'm deleting all of this, and I'm going to be writing an h1 tag over here. So I want to explain something to you guys. What we want to be working with is books. That's the kind of data that we want to work on this website. Let's imagine that this is a very simple website where we're going to be able to manipulate data related to books. So I'm going to write over here book website, something like that. I'm going to delete this state, and we should see that this appears in our screen. Perfect. Now, let's think about it this way. I want to be able to, first of all, display a list of all the books in our database over here in our screen. Right now, I don't have that information, so we're going to leave that for later. But I also want to have some sort of form with inputs and buttons, which I can use to add a book into our database, right? So that's the first thing we want to work with. So over here, I want to put a div over here and just basically separate this as the form of what we're going to be working with. You can also use a form tag, but I just like you doing it like this. Then we want to add an input of type text And this input will be used to be able to, so you can enter the name, or book title actually, book title. And I put this as a placeholder so you know which input is which. You can see it over here. We're only gonna have two pieces of information for the books. We're only gonna have two pieces of information for the book because we wanna keep this simple. We're just gonna have the book title and the release date. So I have two different types of data. The release date will be a number, as you can see. And we're not gonna put any placeholder for this. Actually, we can just put a placeholder release date. And yeah, you can see that I can put a number over here. Perfect. Now the last thing I need for this form is I need some sort of submit button. So I'm going to put a button over here and right here, add book. Perfect. So now we understand, the CSS looks kind of weird, but that's fine. Now we understand that this is the kind of data that we want, correct? So now that we have that out of the way, this is pretty much all of the React we want to do before we actually start building your database. The reason why I showed you this first is because the way this full stack roadmap is going to work is the user is going to be able to write some stuff over here, right? Then click on this button, and when they click on this button, we're going to make what is known as an API request to our API that we're building with Django. And then in that API request, we're sending the data that we get from this input. So whatever the user wrote on this input, and sending that to the API so that then the API can manipulate the data, can do something with it, add it to the database, do all of that. So now that you understand that, we can start building the backend. And we're going to obviously come back to the React part. It's more of a back and forth type of thing. So to build the backend, I need to open up over here my terminal again and open up a new tab on my terminal. See, I'm now back in the React Django directory. I want to cd into my server. Perfect. Now, in order to work with Django, you need to have a couple of things installed. Just like with Vite, you needed to have Vite installed. With Django, you do need to have Python installed. In order to check your Python version, you need to do Python or Python 3 and that dash version like this. And it should say, if it shows up a number like this, it means that you have it installed. Now you also need pip installed, and you can just use a curl command, search on Google how to install pip. It's really quick, and it's just the package manager for Python libraries. Now with pip, I'm gonna be able to do pip install both Django and also Django REST framework. So we're gonna be using something called the Django REST framework in this project to be able to actually use and create a REST API in a very easy manner. So I'm gonna press enter. I already have this installed, but it doesn't really matter. In this case, I already have it installed, but you have to do it as well. Now that we have that installed, you need to run Django admin. So Django admin start project, and then give a name to the project. I'm just gonna call it a new project, but you can name it wherever you want. Now, if this doesn't actually create folders and a couple of files inside of your server folder, and it says something like you don't have that installed, or that's not like a command that they know, it probably means that you need to create a new terminal tab and start from there again. But for me, I already had the package installed, so that wasn't really a problem. Now I'm gonna go into my new project folder, and this thing over here that was installed inside of, or created inside of our folder for Django, basically is a folder that is gonna contain all the configuration files for our Django project. Now inside of a Django project, you can have multiple apps. An app can be a totally separate API. So we will create one app inside of this project, which is going to be the API that we are going to be calling from our frontend. So to actually start that API or that app, I'm going to run Python 3 or Python, just if you're using Python, and then run manage py start app, and then give a name for it. I'm going to call it API since it's the API that we're going to be building. And it's going to create over here a folder for our API, including a bunch of files that we definitely need to use in order to create our REST API. So now what we have to do is we have to actually tell our project, our Django project, that it needs to use, it's going to use both the API folder to be part of the project, and also the Django REST framework in our project. So the way we do that is we go to the settings.py, we go to installed apps, this thing over here, this array, and we just add an entry for the API folder and an entry for the REST framework, just like this. Now we need to close this file, go to our API, and start building the model of how our data is going to be created. So like I said, we're working with a book, right? And the only two pieces of data we have for this book is the book title and the book release date, right? So in Django, you can create a model that is going to be how your database tables are going to be created. So we define that model by defining a class with the name book. So in here, book is going to be representing one single book in our database. Now, in order to use the Django models library, we just have to come over here in the argument and say models.model to basically accept a model. Then we define all the fields inside of this model by putting the name of the field. So in our case, since we want a book title, I'm just going to say book title, just like this. Then set it equal to models dot, and then with the models package, you can actually define certain data types. Like a book title will be a string, correct? So the way we define a string is actually a field of characters, right? And in the Django library, the way we define that is by saying char field, which means multiple characters. And then inside of here, we can actually define a maximum length to what we want this char field to be. So I'm going to put actually 50. Now we want to put the release date, right? So actually, I'm going to change this to just title and release date. We want to do it like this. I want to set this equal to models dot. And I just realized something. We made this into a number, right? But technically, this is a date. So we can actually represent this data in multiple ways. Now, I don't want this to be the release date, like the actual date. So like including the month, the date. I actually just want this to be the year. So I'm going to change this to release year and then set this equal to models.integer field. So we're basically saying that this can be represented as an integer. Perfect. Now down here, we have to define how this class will be represented. Now, I wouldn't worry that much if you like about this. It's basically a string function of if you call this class, what is the main variable inside of it that should be represented from the object. So I'm gonna say that it is just the self.title. So if I print a book in Python, it will basically return a string version of its title. Not that big of a deal. But the good thing is we actually created the model of how our data is going to be stored in our database, meaning that with Django, we can make a database migration. So I can say Python 3 manage.py and then make migrations. Press enter, and it will actually create a db.sqlite3 file, which is going to allow us to create the model book inside of our project. Now we only created the migration. We haven't actually migrated the table. So we're gonna do Python 3 manage.py migrate. Press enter, and as you can see, it has actually successfully done it. Now one thing you need to understand is that this kind of data over here is defined by Django, right? But if we're gonna be making REST API calls, we're probably gonna be sending data in the format of JSON. So in order to accept that kind of data, we need to create what is known as a serializer. Now, this is definitely going to be confusing if this is the first time you're working with Django, but trust me, it gets easier because it's usually the same process every time you make a new one. So we literally just need to create a function that is going to be used to tell Django how to turn our JSON data into this Django model type, right? So the way we do that is I'm going to import from the REST framework library. I want to import the serializers package. Then I want to import from our models file, this one over here. I want to import the book type. Then I want to create a class that is going to be used as following. This class is going to be used whenever we want to serialize or transform some JSON data into Python data. So I'm going to call it book serializer, and I'm going to put serializers.model serializer, and then this is the part where it's going to be confusing, but basically you just need to set the model to be equal to the book model, and then the fields that we want to serialize is basically all of them. So this is just how the serializer package works. You don't need to understand line by line what each line does. Every time you create a serializer, it's pretty much going to be like this, unless you want to actually customize it, which comes later on in your Django development journey. So I wouldn't really worry about this for now. Let's straight up just start import similar, then API that acts this function. Now we need to define. Now that we have this done, we can start building the API endpoints that we're going to be working with in our project. First one I want to do is the actual endpoint to get all of the books in the database. Right now we have 0 books in our database, so it will become a little bit redundant, but we will also use the knowledge that we gain from building this endpoint to create the add book endpoint, which then will help us have data actually implemented, right? So inside of our views.py file is where we actually write all of our endpoints. So over here at the top, I want to delete this, and I want to import some stuff. So from the REST framework, I want to import directly from the decorators package. I want to import the API view package. So then I'm going to also import from the response. I want to import the response value or function. Then I want to import the status from the REST framework, so we have access to some status codes. And then we want to also import from the models file and import the book that we created. And we also want to import the serializer that we created. So book serializer. Now, obviously, I just imported a bunch of stuff. You probably don't understand any of them. I don't expect you to understand any of these, but I definitely do think you should understand why we did this. We want to use the book model that we created to manipulate the data and add stuff and read stuff from the database. And we also imported the serializer because since we're working with the API endpoint over here, it's where we're going to be converting data from JSON to Python models. Now, the rest is how we define our endpoints. For example, this API view decorator. If we want to create an endpoint over here, we can use this API view thing to basically define what kind of requests we have over here. For example, I want to create a GET request that reads all of the data in the database, that basically returns back to the front end every single book inside of this book table. Well, the way I do this is I create a function called get books. Then I can actually access the request by using this request argument over here. But in this case, we don't really have anything we're accessing. We really literally just want to go to the database table, get everything and return back. And inside of here, we can now use our model to actually access that data. Now in Django, if you want to get all of the like entries in a specific model, we just say the name of the model dot objects dot all, and this all function over here will return all of the objects from this model, which means all of the entries of our table. Now I want to set this to a variable called books, just like this, because now I want to serialize that data and return back as JSON. Like I said, we're converting from JSON to Python models, and we're also converting from the model data to actual JSON so we can return. So I want to create a variable called serialized data, and it's going to be equal to the book serializer class that we created over here. And inside of here, we're going to put the books that we created. Now, the serializer can accept one thing or multiple things. Since books is an array of objects, we do have to say that the serializer should expect many entries, just like this. Now, this should return back a serialized data, but we actually need to access the data by saying .data over here. And then at the end, I want to return this data. Now, since this is an endpoint, it should return a response, right? So we're going to use the response package that we imported over here at the top, and we're going to return the serialized data. Now, how do we test that? Well, in order to test that, we can just use our browser to do so. But in order to actually have access to this endpoint, we also need to create a URLs file inside of this API folder. So urls.py, I want to import from django.urls, import the path package. Then from the views file, I want to import the get books function. And basically what we need to do is tell Django that this is one of the endpoints that we're going to be creating and define the actual path to that endpoint. So the path will be books / so whenever we access the API and run through the books route, we want to access the get books function, which has a name of get books. So this is how you actually define a path. Now, is this enough to be able to access the endpoint? Not really, because now that we defined the patterns of the URL inside of the API app, we have to also define how to access that through the URL patterns of our project. So this is the main configuration part of our application. And any single app that we create, we also have to define the URL pattern for it as well. So inside of here, I can say that I'm defining a path to our API route or API app, and I want to include inside of here all of the URLs inside of that folder. So I'm gonna put here api.urls. And if you don't know, this basically will get the URLs file inside of the API folder. So we're now basically telling Django that that app should be included in its route definitions, which means that now we can actually run our project, which is really cool. I can come over here and say Python 3 manage.py and then say run server. Perfect. If everything is working, which is not, because it says name error, name include is not defined. Oh, I know what this is. I forgot to import the include package from the Django URLs. Okay, there's another error. Invalid syntax. Let's take a look. It's on this file. Oh yeah, I put from serializer from book serializer. If you caught that, good for you. We need to change this to import. And okay, it seems like, didn't I put data over here? I remember putting data, but maybe it got deleted. We just have to put .data. And yeah, now everything is working. If you're new to my channel, I love leaving in parts where I get things wrong or parts where I get into a bug, so you don't get demotivated thinking that everything I do is perfect. I know a lot of YouTubers do that, which is not a problem as well, but I don't want to really demotivate you guys and think that I never make mistakes. You'll see me making mistakes in the video, but also you'll see me correcting those mistakes, which then can help you if you ever run into those again. So you can see it says that everything is working and that our server is running on this route. Now, this is a route that is currently running your computer. So I can come over here and actually access the API. Now, it tells us that there's two URLs that are defined in our project. The one we want to go is to the API one, not the API users, just the API one. And you'll see that it still doesn't work because this is the only one that matches. So we do have to go to books. And you'll see that we actually successfully made a GET request to our API, but it returned back an empty array, meaning that we don't have any data, which is expected. I didn't really expect to have data in here. It would be weird, but we successfully made a GET request to our API. That's great. Now, what do? Well, we should add the endpoint at least to be able to add data to our table so that we now can then make this request and see some data inside of this array. Well, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to come to our views.py file and I'm going to recreate this, but make a new type of request that is a post request. So for those who don't know, get is usually for for reading data. Post is usually for altering or creating data. So I'm going to create a function called createBook over here, which is going to be used to actually get data from the front end and use that data to create a book. Now, if you recall, when we made our React app over here, we allowed a user to put their title and the release year, right? I'll change this placeholder to release year, which are two pieces of data. And then we're going to click on this button and make the API request. Now, when you make a request to an API, a post request, for example, you can send what is known as the body of data. You can say some data, some object inside of the body. Now, how do we get that data? Well, we can access it directly inside of this request argument over here. So I'm going to delete this over here, and I'm going to directly get the data that the front end is sending. So I'm going to say data equals to request.data. And with this, we'll have access to whatever the front end user is sending. Then I'm going to create a serializer, basically variable, and set it equal to book serializer. And I want to pass in the data equal to this data that we got from the front end. So we're serializing the JSON into some Python models. Then we need to check to see if this type of data is actually valid. When you're trying to serialize data that is sent from the front end, you do have to do this, which is use this function called isValid. And if it is valid, then you'll execute the rest inside of here. So what do we want to do if it is valid? Well, we want to save the data sent from the front end inside of our table. And it is as simple as saying serializer.save. Just like this. Now, if we successfully saved the data into our database, the data sent from the front end, we want to return back a response that will basically tell the user that there was a successful creation. So we want to send back first the data that they created. So I want to send back the book, the same data of the book that they sent, but also define the status, the HTTP code status that of this request. So the way we define the status is by using that status package that I imported at the top. Now, if you've never worked with status codes, wouldn't worry that much about it. But basically, there's a bunch of different status codes, and all of them represent different things. And it helps debugging network requests in the front end. So in our case over here, it's a 201 because we successfully created data. So I can actually access the HTTP 201 created status by just putting this. Perfect. Now we're pretty much done with this, right? But the problem is we've only defined a response in case the data sent from the front end is actually valid. What if the data is not valid? Well, if it is not valid, then we need to return a response saying that there was some error, right? And the way we access the error, the specific error, is by accessing the errors variable inside of the serializer object. And then we'll probably return back a 400 error, which means it's a bad request. Perfect. Now, this is pretty much done. What do we have to do now? Since we have created a new endpoint, I need to come to our API URL patterns thing, and I need to put over here a new path. So I'll put a path, and it will be to the same books route, but I also want to put a create over here so that we differentiate that. So it's a create book route. Then I want to put the create book function that we do need to import over here at the top. Perfect. And I also want to put a name equal to create book. Perfect. Now, is this done? Well, let's check this out. Let's go into our thing over here and let's go into the create route. immediately you notice that it changes a bit because it shows us this media type, which allows us to put some data inside, and this content thing over here. Well, we can put some actual JSON data inside of here, which will then kind of simulate us sending data from a React app. So over here, I'm gonna put a title. So for a book, let's put Harry Potter 1 as an example, and then a release. Actually, I'll have to put in double quotes. So release year. Let's put, I think it was 1999. I'm not sure, but this is the data we're sending from our front end, or simulating like we're sending from our front end. Let's see if this works. I'll click post, and it seems to have worked because we got a 201 created response, and we return back the data, right? We return back the object containing the title and the release date or release year. Now you may have noticed that there's an ID. So obviously, if you're working with a database table, each entry needs to have an ID. And the good thing is that we didn't even have to define that in the model because Django does all the work for us. Now, you want to see something cool? Since we now have an entry in our table, we can go back to our just normal get request from the books route, and it should now return an array including that data, which means that we finally have some data to work with. Now, we already have almost everything running. What do we do now? Well, let's go back to the React part of things to actually integrate that so that you guys can already get an idea of how everything communicates with each other. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to go over here to, we're going to actually close all of this for now, and we're going to open up our React folder, right? And inside of this app.js, I want to start using a thing called a state. Now, again, I don't expect you to know full on React, but I expect you to at least have heard of some of the beginner stuff like a state. And a state is basically a way for us to hold data that will manually trigger a re-render of our React page whenever that data changes, meaning that we don't have to manually alter the DOM elements, the HTML elements. It will do everything automatically. So in order to create a state, we just have to define it like this. We call the useState hook, and we define an array over here. This array will allow us to define two things. First of all, the name of our state. So in our case, we actually want to create a state that is going to hold all of the data from our API. So all of the books from our API. And then a function that is going to be used to alter that data. So set books. Now, initially, it's going to be an empty array because we haven't made the API request yet. But what I want is whenever someone enters this website, I want to fetch the list of books. So we want to create a function called fetch books. Now this function has to be asynchronous because we're going to be fetching data, right? And we're going to be using a try catch over here to do that. So I'm going to put try, and then I'm going to put catch. And in case there's any errors, I'll just console log the error. Perfect. Now, inside of this try, what I want to do is I want to make an API request to our own API, this one over here, and get the data from all of the books that are inside of this table. Now, this is the route for this GET request. So the way we do this is inside of this try, I want to make a fetch request. Now, since this is an asynchronous operation, I do have to await the response of this. So I'm going to put an await before the fetch. And I'll just put over here the endpoint URL. So our API URL, this one over here. Now, I want to get whatever response this gives us. So I'm going to make a variable called response and assign that to the response of this. Then I want to destructure and transform the response into JSON data. So our actual data that I want to just destructure the JSON data into actual objects that we can access. So I'm going to say const data is equal to await response.json. And now we can check to see if this is working. So I'm going to say console log data, and we'll just, at least for now, look at how the data is console logged, right? Now, how do we actually tell React to execute this function when a user enters the website? Well, we can use what is known as a use effect. It's a hook that basically whatever logic you put inside of here, whatever logic you put inside of this callback function will be executed. Now, in the most simplest terms, if we come over here and add an empty array, it will basically execute this only once and once only when the component or the page renders. So this is what we want. We only want to call this fetch books function once. And whenever it does, it will console log the data or console log an error. So let's check to see if this is exactly what's happening. What we should see is no errors. And we should see a list of this. We should see this, right? A list of our data. So let's refresh this. It seems to have failed to fetch. If I check my network tab over here and I refresh this, we should see a request being made. Let me just, let's see. Oh, it's an issue with cores, and obviously I forgot to install the cores, the Django cores headers package. Sorry about that. But basically, cores is a way for us to define how our front end will communicate with our backend. And since we haven't actually told our Django app how to do that, it won't allow, our React app won't allow requests to that API. So inside of our server, I want to install the Django cores headers package. Now it's gonna install, as you can see. And when that is installed, I need to go into my installed apps part over here in our server, new project, and then settings.py. And over here, I do need to add the course headers package. Then we basically need to add to the middleware array over here the course middleware. This is because a middleware, if you're not familiar, is basically a function that is called before every API request inside of your API. So this is something that we definitely need to run like before the actual request is done to tell React that this is a valid request. So we're gonna say middleware over here. And then finally, we need to define which routes we're going to allow this specific, which websites we're gonna allow to call this API. Now, for production, you should actually specify exactly which websites should be allowed to make requests to your API, because obviously you don't want to allow everyone to request data from your API because it can leak data, it can do a bunch of stuff. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to basically allow everyone, all of the websites to make requests. So all origins are allowed inside of our course. Now, we should see that if I make a request here, my hopes is that everything should work. So I'm going to refresh this. It seems that it was successful. It seems like the data was returned back, and we should actually see in our console, like I said, an array containing the correct data from our API. So Harry Potter 1 and the release year 1999, which is great. Now, how do I display that data inside of our website? How do I actually show it? Well, the way I do this is I'm going to come over here to our app.tsx, and instead of console logging the data, I'm going to finally use the state that we created, right? We defined it as an array, so I can just straight up come here and say that I want to set the books state to be equal to the data that we get back from the API. Now, we set the data, but so what? What are we doing with that data? Well, what I want to do is I want to display that data. Actually, I want to go through each book inside of the books array and display a little like div containing its title and its release year. So the way I do that in React is I access the array, the list of books, I map through all of them, and through each book, I can actually get this book variable over here and return back a div containing p tag, including the title of the book, and a p tag containing the release year. Now, if this format of the syntax is kind of weird, get used to it because it is how you're going to be working with this a lot in React. But how do I get the data from each book inside of this array? Well, keep in mind, this variable over here is representative of each item that's going to be iterating through this list. So I can straight up just come here and say that for each book, we can just get the title like this. And same thing for the release year, we can get the release year. Perfect. And we should see that now it's actually displaying the correct information. We only have one for now, but this is going to change as soon as we implement the post request. But we successfully been able to connect our React app to our Django project, which is great. So now we just want to increase the complexity a bit by making us be able to send data from our front end to the back end by utilizing our post request. Okay, so now we want to, like I said, grab the data from these two inputs. And when I click on this button, call a function that will send data to this post request. So how do we do that? Well, first, let's address the fact that I need to get data from both inputs. So to do that, I'm actually going to create a state for each of the inputs. The first one will be for the title. And the second one, let me just add the title, which will be a string. The second one will be for the release year. So release year and set release year. Perfect. And this will obviously be a number. So I'm going to start with a 0 over here as the initial value. Now, I want to change this to release year. I forgot to do that. How do we make it such that whenever someone types on an input in React, we change a variable to represent that value, right? Because after someone is done typing, I want to be able to grab this title variable and say, okay, this is what they typed on the title input. Well, to do that, we have to access the onChange function from this input. It will allow us to put a callback function over here and access this variable called the event, or E. This event variable allows us to access directly what the value of the input is at any moment whenever there's a change. So I can say I want to set the title variable to be equal to the event.target.value. And what this will do is every single letter that someone types on this input, it will call the setTitle function and change the value of the title state to be equal to whatever the input's current value is, which is exactly what we want. We'll do the exact same thing for the number input. I'll change this to set release year, and we'll do the same. Perfect. Now, we have access to those two values, which is pretty good. Now, what do? I want to create a function called add book. So I'm going to create it. It will also be an asynchronous function. And inside of here is where we're going to be making the post request. Now, I want to call this function whenever someone clicks on the add book button. So I'll just call it like this. Perfect. Now, what do we do now? Well, remember, we need to send back an object containing the book data. So I'm going to create over here an object called book data. And it's going to include the title, which we're going to get directly from this title thing over here. And this can actually, when you have an object where the key and the value are the same name, you can actually shorten this to this. But then we also need a release year or release date, right? In our case, it's a release year. Now, in Python, we defined it like this with an underscore. But in our React app, we defined it like this. So we can't shorten it. We have to do it like this. Perfect. Now, everything is inside of this object, and we can make the post request. Now, the post request will be very similar to what we did over here, but a bit different because now it's not a normal fetch, get request. So we do have to add some more stuff into this fetch function. And also, this should actually open up and make the request to the create route. If you recall, this is the route that we created. Perfect. Now, inside of this create route, I want to put over here a comma, and I want to add a method, and I want to add an object, which is going to include a method, which is basically the type of request that this is. For a get request, you really don't need to add this, but for a post, put, and delete request, you definitely do. So I'm going to say that this is a post request, because we're creating some data. Then I also need to pass in some headers, and this I wouldn't worry that much, but we're basically just saying that whenever we make this request, I want to send some JSON data. So I need to specify the type of content that I'm sending in this request, which in our case will be application slash JSON. And then finally, we actually need to send back the actual content or the data that we're sending to our API request. So the way we do that is through the body of the request. And we have our book data over here, but we actually have to convert it into JSON data. Right now it's a JavaScript object, but to convert it into JSON, all we do is we use the JSON built-in library and say that we want to stringify it, just like this, and then put the book data inside of here. Perfect. Now we have this response. And by the way, I should wrap this around on a try catch. So I'm gonna try catch this, grab some errors, and again, just console log any errors that appears. But inside of this try, I want to grab back this data. So we'll say const data equals to await response.json. And then over here, let's just console log this data to see if it actually worked. We'll obviously get some indication in our whenever we refresh the page, but for now, let's just do that. I'm gonna inspect the element over here, go to our console, and I'm gonna try to write a title. So let's try Harry Potter 2. Let's put the release year to 2000 and click on add book. You should see that we did get back something, which means it probably worked. See, we got back an object with the ID of 2, the release year of 2000, and I wrote Harry Potter wrong, but the title of Harry Potter 2. I think this worked. I definitely believe it worked. Now, how do we see if it actually added to our database? Well, if we refresh this page, it's going to make a GET request again and fetch back all of the data in our database right now. So technically, the new Harry Potter book should appear over here, which is exactly what happens. Perfect. Now, what if we want to add it automatically, right? What if I want to type here Harry Potter 3, put the release year to 2001, and automatically when I click add book, not only it adds it to the database, but also automatically adds it here. Well, the way I can do that is instead of just console logging the data, I can set the books array to be equal to basically everything that it was before. So I can access the current value of this array to be equal, by using this prev or previous value over here, and say that I want to set books to be an array, including everything currently in the array, plus this new data that I'm adding. So this syntax over here is very common in states because states aren't mutable. So you have to, if you're going to manipulate a state, you have to do it like this. Instead of just saying books.push data to add something to that array, you can't do that. You have to set the array equal to a new array that includes everything it previously had, plus the new thing you're adding. So let's see if this works now. If I click add book, you see that it added this over here. If I refresh, it should still be here, even though we're fetching data from our API. You should see that it should also be here. All of the data we just added from the front end. Great. We just did a bunch of stuff, which is amazing. Now we are kind of getting the roll of it, right? We're understanding how to manipulate the front end, the back end, get everything together. What do we want to do now? Well, I want to add both the functionality of editing something, like editing books dates, and also being able to delete a book. So those two things, update and delete. How do I do that? Well, I want to actually, I'm not going to actually edit the date because that really doesn't make sense. Maybe I want to change the title because I just noticed I wrote this title wrong. So what I want to do is for each one of these books, I want to actually make it such that the web page renders an input right next to it. And that input will allow us to write a new title and then click a button. And when I click on that button, it should update that title, not only in our page over here, but also in our database. So what I'm going to do is inside of this books.map, when I'm rendering each of these books over here, right? What I want to do is I want to, right next to the release year, or below it actually, I want to add an input of type text and a placeholder saying new title. You should see that if I close this, and now every book has a new an input. Yes, we only edited once, but we edited inside of this array that is looping for every book. Then I want to add a button that will say change title. And again, it will appear over here. Now, what do I do? Well, we have the stuff set up in the front end, but we don't have the backend input yet, or the backend endpoint yet. So what are we gonna do? Well, for delete and update, it's a bit different from post and get. I'll explain why. We'll come over here to our views part over here. And the reason is that when I get a list of all the books in our database, we're not trying to access information about one specific book, right? We're just getting all of the books together. Now, if I'm trying to create a book, we're not accessing any data inside of our database. We're actually adding data. But if I'm going to delete or update an entry in our table, I need to know which entry I'm deleting or updating. Now, how do I identify or specifically single out a book inside of my list of books? Well, that's where the ID thing that we have over here comes in. All entries or all books in our database table have a different ID. So that is known as the primary key of our table, meaning that it's how we identify different entries. Now, for the update and delete, we do need to pass in that primary key in our request so that we know what database entry we're trying to update or delete. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to actually define the API view over here. I'm going to say put, and I'm also going to say delete. Now, this is something you didn't know, right? We don't have to separate them. We can actually put multiple requests in the same function. And the reason for that is because over here, we're going to define a function called book details or book detail, which is a generic function that can be used to both delete and update a book. So inside of this argument, we can still access the request, which will allow us to pass in some body data like we did with the post request. But most importantly, we need to access the primary key that we're going to be sending in. This primary key will be sent through what is known as the param of API endpoint. So if I were to come over here and access API books /3, right now we don't have any endpoints defined by that, but basically this 3 over here would be passed in directly through this primary key, so we know that we're trying to access the book of ID 3. So it will handle all of that for us. But then inside of this book detail, I'm gonna add a try catch first, because I want to first try to get the actual book inside of our database. So I'm gonna say book equals to book.objects.get, and then I'll try to get the object with the primary key equal to the primary key that we're going to be passing. If it fails, like literally if it fails, I'm using Python, and for a second I forgot, so I'm gonna change this and just do except. If it fails and the book doesn't exist, so does not exist, then we want to return already a response saying that the status equals to status.http, and we'll pass a 404, which usually means that something like some piece of data wasn't found. But if we actually successfully get the book, then this won't be the case and we can continue forward. Now remember, we made this into both a put and a delete. So how do we differentiate the logic between in the case where we're making a put request and we're making a delete request? Well, we can actually single out the request by saying if request.method equals delete, for example, then we do something over here. Or if the request.method equals the put, we can do something over here. Now, I'll do the delete first because it's the simplest thing you've seen so far. Literally, in every kind of API framework I've seen in my life, delete is super easy. Literally, we already have the book over here that we got from the primary key. So if we pass 3 as the primary key, as the ID, this book variable over here will be equal to this object, this model. So all I need to say is book.delete, just like this. And it should work. Then we'll just return a response. I'm typing everything wrong today, I'm sorry. I return a response of the status equal to status.http. And then I'll pass the 204, which means that there's no content. No content, and it should work. Now, how do we test that? Well, I'll actually comment that out for now. And I'll come over here to our urls.py. I'll import the book detail function. I'll add a new path, and this path is a bit different because remember, we do have to pass in the primary key. And how we define this to necessitate a primary key? Well, we say that it requires an integer called pk for primary key. And this should be enough. Then we'll pass in the user or the book detail function. And we'll put a name over here for book detail. Perfect. Now, if I were to test this, I'll actually pass in over here. Let's try deleting the 3. I'll pass in 3, since it's the example that I've been giving. And, oh, it seems like something is not working. It says, oh yeah, classic mistake. This should be a double quotation, not just, or double equal sign, not one, since we're not assigning, we're asking if this is equal to this. Perfect. If I refresh this, now it's allowed, right? Now the thing is, there's 2 types of methods allowed, as you can see. There's a put and there's a delete. So if I want to do the put request, I can put in some content and click on put. But if I want to test the delete request, I can click on delete. Right now, the put won't do anything, as you can see, because we actually haven't added the part where we do the put. So let's test out deleting it. I'll click on delete. Since Django knows that we're deleting something, it will actually ask us if we want to delete it. I'll click on delete, and it should have deleted. Let's test this out. Let me refresh this, and book 3 shouldn't be here. Perfect. It's not actually here. Great. So our delete is definitely working. Let's work on our update, which is a bit weirder, but it's still not that hard, not that different. For the put, we need to, again, get some data from the front end, right? Similar to how we did with the post request. So we will indeed need to do this, get some data from the request and serialize that data, just like this. Then we do still need to ask if it's valid. So I'm going to say, is this valid? And if it is valid, again, I want to save that data, right? Save that data. Because what I'm going to do over here is, this is the same as the post request, right? We're going to send in some book data from the front end, and we're going to save that for a specific book in our database. But the difference is that instead of just doing it like this, like we did with the post request, where we just passed in the data into the serializer, we're also going to pass in the book that we got from here. Because then the serializer will know that we're not trying to add a new book. We're trying to put this data and replace it inside of this already existent entry. And now this shouldn't be created a response. I actually won't return anything. I'll just return back the serialized data. And if it fails, I am indeed gonna return back a bad request. So I'm gonna copy that and put it over here. Perfect. And we should see that now. If I were to come over here and I were to change this data. So let's get back. I wanna come over here. Oh, what's happening? Is there a bug? Oh yeah, similar to the delete, I should have made this into a double equal sign. Perfect. So let's get back over here. Let me try update this data. I'm gonna copy this and go into the books/2 because now we're trying to edit that one. And what I want to do is I want to send back the same data, but I'm not gonna send the ID because the ID is actually gonna go from here, as you can see. And what I want to do is I want to change this to Harry Potter. Just like this. Perfect. Click on put. And as you can see, it successfully altered that data. If I come over here, this is how it used to look. This is how it looks now. Which means our put function is successfully created. Now, let's use it in our front end. Let's use both the put and the delete. For the put, it's pretty simple. We already have over here a bunch of the front end created, right? We have the inputs and the buttons. Now what I want to do is I want to create another state for the new title. So the new title I want to change and then set new title and create this as a string. Perfect. Now what I want to do is I want to, whenever someone is typing on this input, I'm going to do the same thing I did over here, but for the new title state. So set new title. So whenever someone's typing on this input, it will change that. Now, whenever someone clicks on this button, I want to call some sort of function called update title. But the thing is, how do we know which book we're trying to update? Because we do need the primary key, right? We need the ID from the book. Now we have access to that ID because this function will be called inside of this loop that is iterating through each object, and each object has an ID field. So what I want to do is I want to call this update title function, which is going to include an argument called ID, our primary key, right? And for that, we'll just say we want to pass in the book.id. Now let's create that actual update title function. So update title, it's gonna be an async function again, and it's gonna require the primary key over here, which is the ID. Now all of this that we did in our add book will be pretty much the same. We're gonna copy this and put it over here. The difference is that we don't want to use the release year and the title from this thing. We actually want to keep everything kind of the same. So I actually need another argument inside of here. I need the current title. So I actually need something else over here. I need the current release year because we don't want to change that. And whatever we pass over here as the book data will have to be the final one that we're saving. So I want to pass over here as well the current release year, which is the thing that we're not changing. Perfect. Now, inside of here, the new book will look like this. The title will be equal to the new title that we are typing on that state, on that input. And the release year will be equal to the release year that we grab from this function, right? Which, since they're both the same, I can actually just destructure that like that. Now, the endpoint we're calling is not the create one. We're calling just a normal books one. But we do need to pass in the primary key here, whether it be 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now we have the primary key, the ID, directly from here. So how do we pass that there? Well, we need to change this from double quotations to backticks, because in JavaScript, it will allow you to put directly variables inside of here by using this $sign and then curly braces. And then we can directly put the primary key variable inside of this. Then I want to change this from a post to a put. And this should be correct, right? Now, the one thing I want to show you guys is that we don't want to, we're going to get back the updated data. But right now, we don't want to, what we want to do is change, for example, if we change the Harry Potter one to be, Harry Potter 100, right? We want to change the title of this specific entry. So how do we do that? Well, we have the ID of that entry. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to set the books state to be equal to the same as it was before, but I want to map through each of those of the items in that state, which is an array, and obviously grab a book per item. And if I want to make like an if statement inside of here. If the book.id is equal to the primary key that we have over here. So if it is the actual book that we just updated, right? Then from this map, I want to return back the data that we get back from the response. So the updated version of this data. But if it is not, then I just want to return back the current item. So this looks kind of weird, but this is how you alter one specific item inside of a state that is a list. So we're literally just looping through each item in the state, so each book. And if we find the book that we just updated, which means if the ID of that book is equal to the primary key of the one we just updated, we're changing its data. So the return is basically what stays in the array. So we're returning back the updated data. If it's not, so if it's every other book in that list, we just keep it the way it was before. We should see that now. I come over here and I try to change the name of this to Harry Potter 100. Change title. This should update. But did it work and actually update in our database? Well, it definitely did. So that's great. We can see that, I don't know, if I go to books 0, it correctly updated. Now, the final thing we want to do is just the delete, since this video is already getting a bit long, but it's pretty much everything from scratch, right? So you guys learned a lot in this video. Now, the delete is pretty simple. I'm just going to add a button over here, call it delete, add an on click. You guys get it already. Make a function, in this case, call a function called delete book. We haven't created it yet, but this function, the delete also requires the ID. So we definitely do need to pass in the book ID. By the way, if you notice, some of the on clicks I did when I called the function, some of them I just put the name of the function like this, and some I did this weird anonymous function notation over here. Whenever you're passing in arguments to a function in line like this, so inside of an on click or something like that, you have to actually create a function like this. In this case, we didn't pass any arguments to the add book, so that's why we could just put the name. But in this case, we definitely need to. So we did it like this. So let's create the delete book function. Const delete book. It's going to be async. It's going to require the primary key. And inside of here, I'm just going to copy this thing over here. Now, one thing that is different is we're not passing JSON data, so we don't have to pass this headers and we don't have to pass this. But since it's not a GET request, we still need to pass a method, but the method will be the delete method. Perfect. Now, the primary key is the same as what it was before, which is perfect. And we do have to do this. And we also have to do a catch inside of here. So we'll console.log whatever error appears. Now, for this data, whenever we get this back, we will have the actual book inside of here, right? But technically, we're not really returning anything major. Like, I don't really care about the data of the book that was deleted. All I want to do is, if this is successful, I want to remove that book from our array over here. So that's pretty simple. We're going to be using the same methods as we've been doing before with the state, but we're going to be using the filter function instead of the map function. So we'll say that the new books list will be equal to its array, but we're going to filter out the book, which isn't the book that we just deleted. So this filtering logic that we had over here will tell us what kind of items we shouldn't delete. So the items we shouldn't delete are the ones whose ID is not equal to the primary key. So basically, this will keep all the items whose ID is not equal to the primary key, meaning that it will delete only the one that has the ID equal to the primary key that we just deleted. Let's test that out. Let's refresh this. Let me delete Harry Potter 100. Didn't seem to have worked. let's look at the console. Unexpected end of JSON input. It looks like something, some issue. Weird. It did actually delete the item. I think the problem is that we're trying to convert this, but I don't think we actually returned anything, right? Let me check over here. Views, delete. Yeah, we didn't return any object, so there's nothing to convert into JSON. So let's not await a response.json. That's what caused the problem. Let's try this again. Let me try deleting this Harry Potter 2. And yeah, you can see it deleted. Now we have no items. I can add another one. I don't know, 2025. Add book. Perfect. I can change the title to Harry Potter 4000. We can see it works. Perfect. And I can delete this item. Perfect. We've successfully created a full stack CRUD application using ReactJS with Vite and Python with Django. And yeah, that's pretty much the tutorial. If you're interested in checking out the code, it will all be in the description. If you want me to make more Django and React videos, this is the second Django video I've been making in my life. The first one didn't get that many views. It didn't get that good of a response, but it's also because I mostly make React content. So if you want me to continue making videos like this, leave 10 comments, leave 20 likes. Just help me out, because it will tell YouTube that that you guys want to watch this, and that's the number one thing that YouTube cares about. So if you're interested in me making more videos like this, please stick around and leave some likes and comments, and I would massively appreciate it. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I see you guys next time. Peace.